Hagmann Report for today. It is August 7th, 2014. It's a Thursday. This is a live broadcast. I'm Doug Hagmann in studio with my co-host, my son, fellow researcher, investigator, Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear 3 hours of completely mind-blowing programming tonight. Well, I'll tell you, make sure your seat backs are in their upright and full lock position. Make sure you're buckled in because you're in for a fantastic show, a great show. You're listening to the only show, folks, where the news is presented to you in a multidimensional format in 3D. In fact, I'm very serious about 3D. We're going to be issuing 3D glasses to our listeners. I know how silly that sounds, but if you think about it, well, we can see through you. I guess that's the message to the people we want to send.
I don't know about that, but
well, we do look well beyond the headlines and bylines, bringing the news behind the news. We broadcast live each and every weeknight, folks, from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. It's one of the fastest-growing shows on the Internet. Thank you so much to all of our listeners. Folks, you should start to be getting those who ask for them. The bumper stickers, we've been sending them out. It's really a two-man operation here. So
I took a shopping cart full down to the post office today. So early next week, many should be receiving even more. So.
And after the show, I'll be spending some time trying to catch up. It's just something that we've been doing, just kind of for fun, really to get our name out there. But, folks, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time on the Internet. Our home base is HomelandSecurityUS.com. Now, also, find us at HagmannandHagmann.com. That's our home base for the radio show. That's HagmannandHagmann.com. HomelandSecurityUS.com is going to be relegated for investigative reports, or at least used for that purpose. HagmannandHagmann.com for the guests for the show material. We're simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. Troy, we love you. There you can tune us in at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you for deliberately listening to this program. Thanks for your belief and trust in us as we walk through what I consider a minefield of headlines and current events. Now, tonight we've got a gentleman. You heard him last week with Steve Quayle. He's on solo tonight. If there was such a thing as a rising star, I would classify this gentleman as a rising star. He's actually already a rising star, a risen star in his own right. His name is Tim Alberino, and you can find him via Steve Quayle's website, the Alberino Analysis. He is an expert. I consider him an expert in ancient civilization. What we're going to be talking about tonight is really the pre-Adamic civilization. If you recall, we spoke about George Pember's book. George Pember was an author back in the 1800s, and he wrote a book called Earth's Earliest Ages. And, I have a favorite saying, and I use this a lot of times in investigations, and I use it today. In order to understand the future, you've got to look at the past. And a lot of times, too, as an investigator, if you want to be able to understand what perhaps somebody might be doing, a perpetrator, in this case, perhaps the New World Order individuals, you've got to look at past history. If you want to understand where we're headed as a civilization, you've got to look at the past. Well, an expert on the past is Mr. Timothy Alberino, and we are so pleased to have him join us tonight for the 3-hour program. He's going to be, you're going to be hearing so much more about him. I put him up there in the same category as Steve Quayle, Stan Deo, and others. He's just so knowledgeable. Mr. Alberino, welcome to the Hagmann Hagmann Report.
Hey, it's great to be on with you guys this evening. You certainly made me sound a lot more incredible than I think I really am, but it's an honor to be on the broadcast. I've been listening to you guys for a few years now, and I just want to thank you here on air for your guys' faithfulness to report the truth and to do what you do.
Well, we do our best. Sometimes we stumble over our own tongues. I do that so many times. and our own feet. But, you know, Joe, you and I mean, we do try to get the truth out there, however uncomfortable it might be, right? I mean, Joe, you're I mean,
yeah, we do.
And we battle. We battle, too.
We bump heads sometimes, but, yeah, our only agenda is just to figure out the truth and bring the truth from a biblical perspective to the audience that listens. And just so happy to see that the audience is still growing, that people are still out there listening. And, you know, Tim's going to offer a great perspective on things tonight. And as so many of our guests do, I just ask that people pay attention and take what they need to the Lord in prayer from this, and it's going to be a great show. With that, I'm gonna hand it over to Tim. Tim, where do you want to start off tonight?
Well, as a disclaimer, let me say first, I've never talked for 3 hours straight. My wife might disagree with that, but I've never talked for 3 hours straight on a broadcast at any rate. So you guys feel free to jump in, interject, ask me questions, change the subject, whatever you want to do at any time. I would like to start off kind of where we left off last time on the broadcast with Steve, and go back and touch a little bit more on the pre-Adamic world and hit some of the points, some of the more technical points, because I think there might be some people listening that are maybe not familiar with what the term pre-Adamic refers to, or gap theory. I'd like to explain that, maybe spend the first part of this broadcast explaining that. So it might be boring for some people who've already heard about this, who already know what the gap theory is, who already know what the pre-Adamic Earth or paradigm is. But for those who don't, they'll certainly learn at least Pember's view in the next half hour.
Well, do you agree? I mean, I do have George H. Pember's book. In fact, I got it, I think, at a steal from Raiders News from Tom Horn's site when he had a special on it. Do you agree pretty much with Pember's analysis on the Earth's earliest ages? I mean, that book, you agree with what's in the book?
Yes, I absolutely agree with Pember's. He addresses a handful of different subjects, and I think he's right on. There may be a couple of discrepancies that I have, and I'll say what those are after I go through after I explain what his point of view is. But yes, I think that Pember is probably one of, and I was just introduced to George H. Pember a few months ago, so I am not by any means an expert on George H. Pember, but I've read a lot of different books from a lot of different people, both secular and Christian books. And the guy, when you read the book, the guy is just, he's a genius. The way he writes, the way he explains things, his point of view, his insight, both in biblical terms and also in analyzing spiritualism and theosophy, which a great part of the book is devoted to, at least the 5th edition that Tom Horn sells, that the Defense Publishing sells. Okay,
and I do want to say this to people. If it sounds like we are regressing or going back in time and focusing on an ancient period, people might ask, well, why would you do that with all of the news, with Ebola in the news, the southern border, what's going on in Ukraine and everywhere else? Why in the world would you take 3 hours and talk about this? Because
the crises aren't going anywhere, and this is very important.
Well, yes, but also, Tim, tell me this. By understanding this pre-Adamic, the antediluvian era, we can get a better understanding of the very Luciferian, satanic New World Order agenda. Can we not?
Absolutely. In order to understand the present, you have to understand the past. And especially when it comes to understanding Luciferianism, because it is Luciferianism that is at work behind the agenda. And Luciferianism began in the first few pages of the first book of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. Luciferianism was what, in fact, was presented to Eve. And So the occult world, and we can, and by the way, I intend to, after I get through the Earth's earliest stages stuff here in the beginning, the pre-Adamic stuff, I would like to have a conversation concerning how some of this stuff ties into current events. But because Luciferianism, as I said, began in the Garden of Eden, and it is the driving force, it is the governing force behind what's the events that are happening on the Earth, because as many people well know, the Earth is run by an occultic priesthood, and that is a fact. That's not an opinion. That's not a conjecture. That is a fact. The guys who run this world, the human representatives of the ruling faction on this planet, are literally people who drink blood, who conduct ritual orgies and human sacrifices. They sacrifice 3-year-old boys, and they dress up in robes and conduct secret ceremonies in places like in the bowels of the Vatican. And a lot of people might roll their eyes at that kind of a statement, although I highly doubt that there are many people like that in your audience. But it is the truth. As bizarre as it sounds, as far-fetched as it sounds, that is the truth of the world in which we live. And for those who are believers, for those who are believers in the Bible, that should be something that we take for granted. That should be something that we should be secondhand knowledge for us, because the ruler of this world, Jesus called him the prince of this age. The ruler of this world is governing these factions from behind the scenes, from behind the throne, so to speak. And we should expect that those who are in league with him are going to possess his attributes, again, as far-fetched as it may sound to some people.
When you mentioned about the in the bowels of the Vatican, I can just see people saying, wow, that's, you're slamming Catholicism. This has nothing to do with Catholicism. This has got everything to do with what's way, way above, at least it's my understanding, what's way above the average person's mentality or knowledge, I should say mentality.
And if I can jump in here, Aleister Crowley, one of the more popular Satanists in our history, wrote a book, Magic in Theory and Practice. And in that book, it describes child sacrifice, how to commit. And I'll quote the book. So for those with a soft stomach, hold your ears. It says, for the highest spiritual working one must accordingly choose the victim which contains the greatest and purest force. A male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and suitable victim. And it goes on from there. And it talks about how a blood sacrifice is dangerous but is needed. And all children human sacrifices are the best. And I'm paraphrased the end there.
Wow. Oh,
yeah, something that a lot of people don't know about Aleister Crowley is that he was actually kicked out of Italy by Mussolini. He had something which was called the Abbey of Thelema that he set up in a cottage somewhere in Italy. I can't remember exactly where it was. Somewhere maybe around Naples or something. Maybe one of the listeners would remember. Somewhere around in some village in Italy, he set up an abbey in which he conducted the most profane, the most obscene acts with a group of people. That Mussolini had him basically kicked him out of the country. Not basically, literally kicked him out of the country because he was such an obscene person. Of course, he was called the wickedest man in the world by the newspapers in London. But see, we're already beginning to move through the thread that begins way back in the beginning in Earth's earliest stages.
We'll take us back there, because I was just going to say, Aleister Crowley is also on the front of the album of the Beatles, one of the Beatles albums. But yeah, getting ahead of ourselves. Go ahead and take us where start off with however you want to start us off with.
Okay, so I'm going to
sidetrack you. I'm sorry.
I'll move through this fairly quickly. I think it's important for people who don't understand the pre-Adamic stuff to at least have an understanding of what the theory is, because I know that a lot of your listeners have heard the term pre-Adamic kicked around a lot. I'll try to move through this as quickly as I can. I'm going to present it from George Pember's perspective, from George Pember's book. This is actually, I was hoping to have an Alberino analysis done on Earth's earliest ages. The first part of it is probably going to be three episodes. I was hoping to have it done before this show, but I wasn't able to do that. So I'm going to be actually using the first part of my analysis as my notes here. And again, this is for informational purposes for those who are curious about what is commonly referred to as the gap theory. So this may seem a little bit dry, a little bit boring for some people. Bear with me for the first half hour or so. We can get through this, and then I would love to dive back into Aleister Crowley and that kind of stuff, because that's really my forte, is the occult and where these things are going. But it is important to understand, as Steve always says, the roots of evil, rather than just always observing the fruits of evil. So this is analysis, the first part of an analysis on Earth's earliest stages, the book by George H. Pember, which again is available over at Tom Horn's website, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and can be purchased there. So basically, the book begins by addressing the age of the Earth and the creation story. Pember makes an astute observation concerning the prevalent Christian narrative that God created the Earth in a state of disarray and darkness. He contends that this popular error in regard to the creation sprang from the pagan doctrine of chaos, and this was new to me. This idea of the pagan doctrine of chaos. I never really put the two together until I read the book until I read Earth's Earliest Stages. Simply stated, the doctrine of chaos teaches that in the beginning was chaos, and the Earth was an unformed and confused bulk suspended in the void of space, which was later molded and shaped by the hands of the gods. Since creation from chaos was the traditional narrative of both the Greeks and the Romans and other ancient factions, Pember believed that it had infiltrated Christian doctrine as well. And that's a very interesting take on by George H. Pember, that these, and I think he's right, not only when referring to the what's sometimes called the doctrine of chaos, that the earth was, basically creation came out of chaos. Not only was that doctrine prevalent in Pember's day and made its way into mainstream Christianity, but there are, if you go back and look, there are a lot of Babylonian traditions and a lot of Sumerian and occultic, Luciferian even, doctrines that have slipped into to a lot of the modern Christian doctrines, which we won't go over those. We'll focus on the creation from chaos doctrine. Concerning the influence of the chaos legend or the chaos doctrine in Christianity, Pember says, and this is a direct quote from his book, "This doctrine, the doctrine of chaos, ancient and widespread as it was in the time of our Lord, did not fail to influence the real as well as the spurious Christians." And this is a condensed quote, by the way. "The Orthodox Christians gave clear testimony to the influence of the popular belief in their interpretation of the commencing chapter of Genesis. For they made the very first verse signify the creation of a confused mass of elements out of which the heavens and earth were formed during the 6 days, understanding the next sentence to be a description of this crude matter before God shaped it. And their opinion has descended to our days, but it does not appear to be substantiated by Scripture, and the guile of the serpent may be detected in its results. For how great a contest has it provoked between the church and the world? How ready a handle do the geological difficulties involved in it present to the assailants of Scripture? With what perplexity do we behold earth gloomy with the shadow of pain and death ages before the sin of Adam? How many young minds have been turned aside by the absolute impossibility of defending what they have been taught to regard as biblical statements? And lastly, in carrying on the dispute, how much precious time has been wasted by able servants of God who otherwise had been could have been more profitably employed." That was a quote from Pember's book. And to the final point he makes there about the monumental waste of time that has been arguing over the creationism, some of the creationism controversies. For example, the age of the earth, a lot of people have spent, and I'm kind of veering away from Pember's a book here and interjecting my own opinion here, but a lot of people have spent a considerable amount of energy, as Pember says, in time debating whether or not the earth is younger than 10,000 years old. And in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really make a difference how old the earth is, as long as you understand who created it, and as long as we understand the rest of the gospel as presented in Scripture. The age of the earth really does not have any bearing on the gospel. However, I will say this. Many doctrines or many circumstances in Scripture, especially in the book of Genesis, that do have direct bearing on the gospel and direct bearing on our humanity and on the unfolding story that we find ourselves caught up in, are overlooked by the vast majority of Christendom, and in fact are completely rejected and denied in many of our theological seminaries. And of course I'm referring to one of the primary ones is the issue of Genesis 6 and the fall of the Watchers and the copulation of the angels with human women and the creation of what people commonly refer to as the Nephilim or the giants. So my point is, whereas many people have spent hours and hours and hours debating and ruminating over how old the earth is, making that such a monumental issue, even engaging secular society in these arguments about how old the earth is and is it really only a young earth or an old earth, they're completely glossing over, ignoring, or in the worst cases, willfully rejecting some of the most profound truths that give clear and concise answers to the times in which we currently live. So getting back to this idea of the doctrine of chaos that Pember talks about in the beginning of his book, remember, order out of chaos is essentially what we're talking about, was and is to this day a Luciferian principle. Chaos out of order is perhaps the true biblical narrative expressed in the first two verses of Genesis. In other words, in the beginning, God created order. And as was the case in our world, insubordination, or what we call sin, brought corruption and chaos, which ultimately led to judgment and destruction. The idea is that there exists a significant interval of time between the first and second verses of Genesis. That's where we derive the pre-Adamic world from. We believe that it's being inferred between the first and the second verses of Genesis. In theological circles, this is referred to as the gap theory. The gap theory, also called gap creationism or restoration creationism, postulates that an indefinite span of time exists between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Proponents of the theory argue that verse 2 is describing a reforming or restoration of the order that God had originally created in verse 1, but was destroyed in a catastrophic judgment event. The theory, though hotly contested, is not without logical substantiation. And again, I'm reading from my notes here from my analysis that I'm going to be doing here tomorrow. In most Bibles, the first two verses of Genesis reads as follows: "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." And that is, of course, how the vast majority of the Bibles that we have today read. That happens to be the King James. Pember contends that the translation of the phrase, "the earth was without form and void," in verse 2 is not the most accurate rendering from the Hebrew, but, quote, "a glaring illustration of the influence of the chaos legend," end quote. He notes that Julius First, renowned 19th century Hebrew scholar, renders the term "without form," or tohu in the Hebrew, the word is tohu in the Hebrew, as ruin or desolation. So in other words, the word tohu in the Hebrew in most of our Bibles has been rendered without form, has been translated without form. But many people believe, many scholars believe, and there's good reason to believe, that the more accurate rendering or translation of that word of tohu is ruin or desolation.
Yeah,
the
Tim,
term void.
If I can here, I have the Strong's Concordance out. The tohu, it says, from an unused root meaning to lie waste, a desolation of surface that is figuratively a worthless thing, confusion, empty place. It goes on from there, wilderness, and a list of a number of other adjectives as to what you were just saying.
Yep, that's it. That's exactly the idea. So to render the word tohu as without form, I think, and Pember thought, since I'm doing talking about Earth's earliest ages, Pember's view was that term without form was not adequately translated. I mean, that the term tohu was not adequately translated as without form. That's not an adequate translation. It's much more akin to ruin, ruinous, desolation, to become desolate, to be made desolate. And also the term void, or boku, this is the famous tohu vuboku, in the Hebrew could also be rendered emptiness or that which is empty. So the word void is probably a pretty good rendering of boku, whereas the term without form is not a very good rendering for tohu. And that may not seem like it makes a big difference right now, but bear with me just for a little bit here, and you'll see why it does make such an immense difference on the totality of what the first couple verses are saying in the book of Genesis. Pember also points out that the Hebrew words tohu and boku are only found together in two other passages in Scripture, and in both cases are clearly used to express the ruin caused by an outpouring of the wrath of God. And I'm going to quote from the book here. In the prophecy of Isaiah, after a fearful description of the fall of Idumea in the day of vengeance, we find the expression, "He shall stretch out upon it the line of confusion and the stones," or as it should be translated, the plummet of emptiness. Now, confusion and emptiness are, in the Hebrew, the same words as those rendered without form and void. And the sense is that just as the architect makes careful use of line and plummet in order to raise the building in perfection, so will the Lord make the ruin complete. There is then no possibility of mistaking the meaning of the words in this place, and the second passage is even more conclusive, for in describing the devastation of Judah and Jerusalem, Jeremiah likens it to the pre-Adamite destruction and exclaims, "I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all of the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. For thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, and yet I will not make a full end." That's Jeremiah 4:23 through 27. As a final observation on the second verse of Genesis, Pember notes that the verb translated as was or haya in the Hebrew can also be translated as to become. An example of this can be found in the history of Lot's wife, of whom we are told that she became a pillar of salt. So in other words, what Pember is saying also, besides the fact that this term tohu vuboku in the Hebrew is only found 3 times in the Scripture, used together like that, tohu vuboku. In every case, it's talking about, in the 2 cases that Pember presents here, it's giving us the idea exactly of what many scholars believe it should, which is ruin or desolation that comes as a result of judgment. So Pember makes the case that what we have in verse 2 of Genesis is the result of judgment. And then he also makes the case that the verb, as I said, translated was or haya in the Hebrew should have probably been translated as to become, and as we saw, and she became a pillar of salt, referring to Lot's wife. That's the word that's used there when it says she became a pillar of salt. again referring to Lot's wife, when Sodom and Gomorrah were being destroyed, and she looked back at the city when she was told not to by the angel. As a result of her insubordination to what the angel told her, she was turned into a pillar of salt. She became a pillar of salt, and that word became is the very same word used in the second verse of Genesis, but there we find it rendered as was. And this is all going to make sense when I get to the very end, which I'm almost done with my point here, and you'll see what I mean at the end here. Although Pember does not mention it in the book, other scholars have argued that the first word of verse 2, which is and, should be more accurately translated as but. Credence to this view is provided in the Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament compiled by 70 Hebrew scribes some 200 to 300 years before Christ, which actually renders the first word of Genesis 1:2 as but rather than and. Now, all of these textual nuances may appear to be insignificant when we review them separately, but when it's all pulled together with the changes implemented, we have a very different reading of the first two verses of Genesis, which reads like the following. Verse 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Verse 2, but the earth became desolate and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. But the earth became desolate and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And this is basically the beginning thesis that George H. Pember lays out in his book. And obviously, if what Pember is presenting here is true, and many other scholars who believe that in what's called the gap theory, and the gap between first Genesis 1 verse 1 and Genesis 1 verse 2, if in fact what they believe is true, what they're postulating is true, then what we have here is a very, very different reading of the beginning of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, but the earth became desolate and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And so obviously that would be referring to some kind of a cataclysm or judgment, taking the order that God had initially created and ruining it, and engaging in some kind of insubordination against God, which then incurred his wrath and his judgments. So I hope that makes sense, the way that I broke it down. If that doesn't make sense, or if there's some things that aren't clear, please ask me so I can make it more clear.
Well, for me,
to the audience here.
What you just the last few sentences you just described just made sense to me. What you're talking about, the gap between Genesis 1 and 1:2. It's like Genesis 6. We read the passage about the giants, and you get that little bit, and that's about it. And it seems to be that there's something missing there. Am I making sense, Tim? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Exactly. That's exactly the sense that you get. Yep, that's right. Tohu. The term is tohu vubohu, which is used in the Bible, which is used in Genesis. Tohu vubohu, and we find this term two other times in the Bible, tohu vubohu, and only two other times in the Bible, both of them referencing the same idea that Pember is postulating, that we're talking about a desolation, a ruin that occurred before God then reformed the earth. So, in other words, the final analysis of what Pember is saying here is that something was going on in the beginning, which is referred to as the pre-Adamite time, the pre-Adamic world. Something was happening there. And again, we talked about last time the possibility of there being an angelic civilization or some other kind of non-human civilization on the earth, or perhaps inhabiting the solar system. Perhaps there was a solar empire, if you will. Many people have conjectured that Satan ruled over the solar system, and of course that's pure conjecture. There are maybe some things that might hint at that in the Bible and other ancient manuscripts, but we cannot say that definitively. I think what we can say definitively is that the Bible is indeed hinting in the first couple of verses in the book of Genesis. The Bible is indeed hinting at something deeper than what we've been I don't want to say what we've been taught as if we've been purposely taught not to believe in it, but certainly it's a nuance that's there. It's one of those nuances, just like so many nuances in the Bible, that when you begin to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, you find this vast paradigm waiting to be uncovered, just behind the different meanings of Hebrew words, or the order in which words are employed in a sentence. And that's why I like to refer to the Bible as a hologram, and that's not my own. That's not my own idea. That's something that I adopted from watching Chuck Missler, referring to the Bible as a hologram. That a hologram is multi-dimensional. It reveals many facets that we can't really see with the naked eye. That's exactly how the Bible is. The Bible's so fascinating because the Bible, not only is the Bible addressing us, not only is the Bible addressing the human race, the Bible's also addressing the rest of creation. The Bible's addressing the animal kingdom. The Bible's addressing the fallen angels. The Bible's addressing, I believe that the Bible addresses every dimension in existence. And in that sense, it's holographic. And so that's why there's so much hidden truth behind one word. And that's why if one word is mistranslated, it's easy to lose something so as significant, as vast as a pre-Adamic world.
It's actually a physics manual, or it references physics, for example. At least I thought or think. In addition to everything else, So yeah, you're exactly correct. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. And that really gives you an appreciation. And the beautiful thing about the Bible, and of course there's so many scoffers and so-called intellectuals who look down upon us, look down upon Christians, and look down upon the Bible because they see it as a very barbaric, crude system of belief. That you have to be basically an idiot to believe in the Bible, when in reality, the truths that are concealed in the pages of Scripture are far beyond what science even could ever uncover, because it's God Himself giving revelation to the human race. Revelation, actually, that is far superior to the teaching of angels, to the understanding and the teaching of angels. When I say the teaching of angels, of course, I'm referring to the teaching of fallen angels, because part of the problem of human civilization is that much of what we have has been, in terms of technology, in terms of theology, in terms of philosophy, has come as a result of the teaching and the instruction of fallen angels. And actually, in the Book of Enoch, for those who've never read the Book of Enoch, the first book of Enoch, it's very important to make that clear. You don't want to read the second or third Book of Enoch. They're very occultic and esoteric. But the first, Enoch 1, especially the beginning of Enoch 1, which is called the Book of the Watchers, addresses the whole scenario. And I won't get into it now, because if I were to do that, I would actually want to read portions of the Book of the Watchers, and I'm not prepared to do that. But the Book of the Watchers actually addresses this whole Genesis 6 scenario in astounding detail. It's like it takes the chapter of Genesis 6 and it opens it up and it unfolds it as a story. And
you're right, Tim.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
The Book of Enoch, the first book, which you're referring to, there's 3 books. As you said, the first book is the only book I've ever read, and through my research is the most accurate one. It has been in the canon of Ethiopian Bibles since they've been discovered, and the other 2 books are more occultic, and they are used by the occult to summon demons and different things. But yes, the books of Enoch, there's 3 books. The first one, first book of Enoch, which is part of the Ethiopic canon, is the one that you need to stick with if you're going to read that.
Yes, that's a very important point. First Enoch, the book, which is commonly referred to as the Book of Enoch. It's the Ethiopic Enoch, and it's vastly different in content than the other two. The other ones are is what's referred to as Second Enoch, or the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, or the Slavonic Enoch. You want to stay away from that one, and you definitely want to stay away from Third Enoch, which is called the Revelation of Metatron, or the Hebrew Enoch. And what really sets the First Enoch apart from the other two is that we can verify with certainty that First Enoch was written before Christ, before the birth of Christ, whereas the other two, scholars are almost unanimously certain that they were written after the birth of Christ, and that makes a big difference because obviously, if the Book of Enoch, First Enoch, makes prophecies concerning Christ, which it does, that are accurate and that are fulfilled, then that in itself gives the Book of Enoch credence, especially since all the messianic content in the Book of Enoch, First Enoch, is synchronized with the gospel as presented by Jesus himself and by the apostles. So the reference I was making to First Enoch, to the Book of Enoch, the first part of the Book of Enoch, which is called the Book of the Watchers, is that the 200 watchers, when they fell, and God sent Enoch actually was the intermediary between the watchers and God himself. God was giving Enoch messages to go and deliver to the watchers, these 200 fallen angels, and these watchers were then replying and giving Enoch their reply, which Enoch would then bring and read before God, present before God. And one of the amazing things that God says to these watchers, I find it absolutely incredible. He tells the watchers through Enoch that they possessed the worthless secrets, that the secrets that these watchers had, these incredible beings, angelic beings had, and were teaching to the human race, God called those things worthless. And so back to your point, Joe, about the sciences and or my point, I should say, where I was talking about science and how what's hidden in the Bible is so much is far more incredible than anything that science could ever uncover, because a lot of what we have, as I said, comes from the fallen angels, a lot of the technology, a lot of the philosophy and everything I said, and it seems so amazing to us, especially to the occult world, which is absolutely enamored with the knowledge of the fallen angels, and yet God looks at this knowledge and he calls it worthless. And yet, the knowledge of Christ, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which is given to us who believe, is so far beyond the knowledge, the wisdom, the understanding, the physics, the mechanics that the occult world is receiving from fallen angels vis-a-vis blood sacrifices and contacting the dead, or what they suppose to be the dead, and all these different occultic practices and rituals that they're doing. At the end of the day, what they receive, what they think is so great, because the most valuable asset on the planet is knowledge, especially for the elite. And of course, they use their superior knowledge to control the rest of us. They think it is so great, and yet it is worthless in comparison to the knowledge of the gospel of Jesus Christ, knowledge that that God can give a child is
exactly.
Is far more glorious.
You mentioned about the 200 watchers falling to earth. Folks, of course, we talk about symbolism and how things are recreated, that is, in ritualistic fashion. We have Nathan Liel come on. We have Paul McGuire come on. Steve Quayle, by the way, who will be on tomorrow night. And, by the way, he was on Coast to Coast AM last night. But having said that, all of this ritualistic type of activity. Think about the 2012 Olympic ceremonies where you had the Queen along with John D. Falling to earth, parachuting to earth from a helicopter. think about the symbolism between that and what you just heard about the, shall I say, demons falling to earth, or Watchers, the 200,
Yeah, the Watchers.
Watchers, correct. I guess my point is, ladies and gentlemen, all of these seemingly disparate programs, episodes, do have a common thread that run through them. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, they absolutely do. And by the way, the term Watchers, many people hear that term and they're offended by it or turned off by it because they think that it's not in the Bible. That's not true. It is in the Bible. It's in the book of Daniel. Daniel says he beheld a watcher. And so the term Watcher refers to, the name implies the occupation, you could say, of these beings. They're watchers. What are they watching? They're watching the affairs of this planet, possibly watching the affairs of men. And that's exactly why these 200 angels would be more susceptible to falling, lusting after women, because it was essentially their job to watch the affairs of men.
And Tim, if I can, to back up what you just said, I believe it's in Job when Satan appeared to the Lord, and the Lord said, "Where did you come from?" And he said, "From going to and fro in the earth, from walking up and down and, back and forth through it." And there's a few different references to walking to and fro, going to and fro among the earth. And there's a few, more than not, it's a reference to Satan. And
that's true.
That's what we're talking about. So there are watchers, and I believe we have good angels, just as the Bible says there are bad angels. A third of the angels in heaven will fall down, or will fall with Lucifer, as Scripture states.
Yeah, and it's very interesting when you begin to try and wrap your mind around the. I guess you could refer to it as the ethereal or spiritual or supernatural biology, because obviously there exists in the vastness of creation. We're talking about everything that God has created, including the heavens, whether we're talking about the heavens as outer space or whether we're talking about the heavens as God's throne and that whole realm where God's throne is, and all the different dimensions in between. I was talking to someone the other day and explaining how it's amazing to think and to look out at the universe, because one of the first things that you recognize is the scale on which God creates. God didn't just create one planet. He didn't just create one solar system. He didn't just create one star, and he didn't just create one galaxy. He created myriads of stars and planets and even galaxies, maybe billions or even possibly trillions of galaxies. We can't even, as human beings, it's hard for us to wrap our minds around the scope of our own galaxy, let alone all these other galaxies. And so that shows you, when God creates, he creates on a scale we can't even comprehend. So sort of the Sunday school notion that a lot of people have is that there are just a small group of entities, just a few very general categories of creatures, of beings in existence. There's humanity, there's angels, there's devils or demons, and there's God. And that is it's actually a very ignorant notion. There's a vast amount of creatures, life forms, entities that God has created, including angels, and we know a few of them, cherubim and seraphim, and we know that the devil was a cherub and or was a cherub, and so we have a very assorted group of beings that are in play, not just in heaven, but also in the affairs of men. And once you begin to wrap your mind around that, some of the pieces might start to fall into place for some of these different things that are going on.
Interesting. I want to get back to that because I've got some questions on that. But just when we were talking about Enoch, the book of Enoch, there are, just correct me if I'm incorrect on this or if I'm misunderstanding this, there are really two Enochs in the Bible, an Enoch in the Adamic line and an Enoch in the Cain line. That might be an oversimplistic way of saying it, but that's the only way I know how to say it. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's true, and that's why Jude, when he quotes the prophecy of Enoch, which he does, he identifies which Enoch he's talking about. He says Enoch, the seventh from Adam. So you are correct, Doug. He is Enoch. It's Enoch, the seventh from Adam, the one who walked with God and was not because God took him. That's the one who we're referring to when we talk about First Enoch.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clear that up. And the other thing too, you had mentioned this earlier, and before we move on, the young male child of high, the logic behind it, the young male child of high, intelligence is because it mimics the first sacrifice, which was able to, which represented the promise of salvation, which goes to God's promise to Eve, that we collectively will be saved through childbirth. Does that make sense? I screwed that up, I think. But
who are you referring to?
The logic behind the young male child of high intelligence, because it mimics the first sacrifice, which was.
Are you referring to something that is coming, something that might be coming in the future?
Both past and future. Let me. I'll tell you what. Let me refine my thoughts on that rather than struggle over the question that I had. One more thing before we move on to. I just received an interesting email from someone a regular listener, who says the gap theory, and I'm amazed sometimes at the wrestling over doctrine and the adherence, the absolute adherence to certain non-salvation type of doctrine. But anyway, this emailer says, "Good evening, gentlemen. The gap theory is not cut and dry, and there's much disagreement over it. We know that, of course. You admitted that, Tim."
Yes.
There's an article that he cites, this emailer cites, "Why the Gap Theory Will Not Work." Perhaps you've heard of it. It's by Dr. Henry Morris. Are you familiar with that article at all?
I've read numerous articles on that subject matter, yeah. But I don't know if I've read that exact one, though.
Okay, but listening to you describe the Gap Theory, to me it sounds very logical. I mean, especially when you go to the root meaning of the words.
Well, there is biblical precedent for the gap theory, or biblical evidence, so it's not an idea that is completely out in left field with no biblical substantiation. So the best that people can say is that it's controversial, and yes, it is controversial. But I mentioned one of the discrepancies that I myself have with Pember's analysis Pember's analysis in Earth's early stages is that there was a desire and a push. There was a push to popularize the gap theory in the late 19th century because of the geological findings. You know, that was during the time when they were just discovering the different stratas, what they call the geological stratas beneath the surface of the earth, where, you know, certain kinds of creatures are buried on top of each other, and then they use that to go and date, you know, that all these kind of creatures lived in this epoch, and then these ones live in a different one, and so forth. And so there was like I said, there was a push to popularize what's called the gap theory now, to counter, to give answer to what scientists were saying. And what scientists were essentially saying was, this proves that the Earth is billions of years old. I don't believe that, first of all, that proves that the Earth is billions of years old. I don't know how old the Earth is. I do ascribe to what to the gap theory, especially in the way that Pember lays it out. But Pember says that these creatures, he believes that all of these creatures that are in these geological stratas were from the pre-Adamic world. I don't know that that's the case. In fact, my view, my opinion, is that these creatures that we have buried under the surface of the earth, of course, the dinosaurs and all these different creatures, are many of them from the pre-flood world, from the antediluvian world, and I have many reasons why I hold that opinion. I believe that, for one thing, that whatever happened in the pre-Adamic world was so utterly destroyed that God absolutely buried it, and it could be that the remnants of the pre-Adamic world, some of them perhaps, some of the megalithic stuff out there, that could be remnants from pre-Adamic world, some of it perhaps, but I have a feeling that much of the evidence of the pre-Adamic world is buried far deeper than anybody's even looking. And I think that what we're looking at in the geological stratas beneath the surface of the earth are more a representation of the life forms that existed pre-flood in the days of Noah, the days from Adam to Noah.
Interesting.
That's where I would disagree, and that's my one. That's probably really the only discrepancy that I would have in Earth's earliest stages. I don't find the need. I don't think it's necessary to try and prove that these fossils are from a pre-Adamic world, because I don't give credence to the way that scientists try and date the ages of the Earth or the age of the Earth.
Understood. So you're flexible on that, and really that's not a deal breaker with anything we're talking about anyway,
no.
Right? So,
no, it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not, and it's not. And for the listeners, I just wanted to make sure that I laid out the premise of the gap theory for those who were unfamiliar with it, because rather than just throw around a term, it's more profitable for the people to actually have an understanding of what we're referring to. But far more, in my opinion, although I do believe the pre-Adamic is very important to understand, or at least be open to the possibility of a pre-Adamic world. I believe that's important for some things that are coming in the future. But I think what trumps understanding the pre-Adamic world is understanding the pre-flood world. And, we have an overflow of evidence, literally, that points back to the pre-flood world in terms of fossils, in terms of all kinds of evidence of a mass flood, a water catastrophe that covered the whole earth. And it is crucial to understand the pre-flood world. It's interesting and useful to understand the pre-Adamic world, but Jesus said, as in the days of Noah. So if we are living in the days, or if we're encroaching on the days of the coming of the Son of Man, then there are a lot of key things that we need to understand about the days of Noah. And so understanding the pre-Adamic world, I think, is helpful for some things. I think it's necessary for certain, if you're going to go and explore certain topics, but it's not absolutely necessary for the days in which we're coming, as is the days of Noah, as is understanding the antediluvian world. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does, and I think you made perfect sense with everyone. So go ahead.
Tim, with that, we're going to take our top of the hour break, as we are already at the top of the hour. That went so fast. We'll be right back after these short messages, folks. You're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this Thursday, August 7th, 2014, with our very special guest, Mr. Tim Alberino, and he was on with Steve Quill.
I just watched them knock over a cup of coffee. I just watched them knock over a cup of Tim? Oh, my goodness. All right. Sorry about that.
I'll clean up the mess during the commercials. We'll be right back with Tim Alberino. Ladies and gentlemen, hour number 2 of the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this August 7th, 2014, with our very special guest, Tim Alberino. He is a researcher, a previous guest on with Steve Quill, not too near past, and is a person that you're going to want to keep your eye on and pay attention to, as he's working on many things in the Word, in the Scriptures, searching and learning and sharing the things that are revealed to him with others. And it's a pleasure and an honor to have Tim on tonight. And we are talking about Genesis, pre-Adamic world, how it all began. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to my dad and let you ask a question.
Tim, yeah, well, I'll tell you something, Tim. I just find this topic fascinating. And folks, like I said before, when you're looking at what's ahead and you see the headlines all around you, war now perhaps breaking out again in Iraq with Obama bombing Iraq, what's really going on here? We want to know what's going on. Well, look at the past, understand the past. It'll give you pretty much the framework for what we're seeing today and also for the future. With that, Tim Alberino Analysis on stevequayle.com. Tim, thanks for hanging with us through the break, and I'm going to turn it back over to you. Go for it, my friend.
Yeah, I'd like to try and connect some of the dots for the listeners as to why, because I keep making this ambiguous statement that it's to understand what's coming, we have to have a good grip on what's behind us, what's already happened on this planet. So, having dealt with the pre-Adamic stuff, just to give people some information on what we mean when we say pre-Adamic, I'd like to talk a little bit about the antediluvian times, which I did. This may seem like a repeat of last week's broadcast for some people, where Steve and I were breaking some of this stuff down. But I want to get a little bit more specific, because really you cannot emphasize this enough in the times in which we live. We have to understand, again, as Steve always says, the roots of evil and not just be concerned with the fruits of evil. So obviously what we see on the news, on Fox News, for example, or CNN or whatever, what we see is obviously the fruits of evil. And a lot of the important stuff that's happening on this planet is actually and quite literally happening under the planet, and not necessarily on the surface where we can all see it. And it's happening both below and above the planet. Let's just put it that way. So let me go back and talk a little bit about, in this second hour, some key points I think we need to start dealing with from the past. We're going to fast forward from the whole pre-Adamic subject, and I just want to focus on the post-Adamic world, the world that we know, in which human beings have preeminence on the planet. And that's really an important thing to understand. Here's a question, Doug and Joe, that when I began to explore and when I encountered some things in Peru, I had a question that really drove me forward into just an immense amount of revelation and information. And that question is simply this: why is it that the human race, and this may seem like a bizarre question to a lot of people, but why is it that the human race, why is it that we maintain dominance of the planet? And I'm not referring to Martians and things like that. Let's just talk in terms that most people can deal with, human beings and fallen angels. Why is it that the fallen angels, why is it that the devil, who is so wise and powerful, has not already basically set up an earthly throne? Why is he not sitting on an earthly throne where we can turn on TV and see him sitting there governing the earth openly, receiving the worship and praise openly of the people? Why has he not established? And of course, we know in the Bible that I think it's I forget the city, Pergasus or whatever it was, Pergamon, I think it was, is reference to where the throne of Satan is, and Pergamos. That was probably a reference. Pergamos. That was probably a reference to Zeus or something like that. But what I'm talking about is open subjugation. Okay, that's the key phrase: open subjugation. Why do we not see on the planet at this point in time the open subjugation and enslavement of the human race directly by fallen angels who reveal themselves in the physical and the material world and build an earthly kingdom in whatever fashion they desire. And that, again, that may seem like a bizarre question for some people, but for me it was a really profound question. And basically, the answer came.
I want to know the answer to that. No, Tim, that to me that's a great question. What the heck?
It's something that people don't. We hear all this stuff about fallen angels doing this and that, and well, yeah, exactly. What the heck? Why don't they just take over and show up and take over and run the show basically out in the open? Why is it ruling from behind the thrones? That's the way it's always been. You always see the influence of fallen angels. You always see the influence of their teachings. You always see them represented in various different depictions of different gods and all, and where obviously, I'm not saying that fallen angels don't have physical interaction with the human race. They do. And I'm not saying that they're not openly worshipped. They are. But they're not dominating the planet, for example, in the way that we might think of a wicked king, for example, coming to power and taking over the nations and enthroning himself and subjugating the people directly. So basically, I was led to an issue. When I think this is the crux of the issue, and I think it's authority. Authority as it relates to the earth. It's very interesting to consider the issue of authority as it relates to the planet on which we live, the earth. And the Bible actually really spells out in detail this issue of authority, really addresses it. Go ahead, Joe. I want to cut you off there.
No, I was agreeing with you, and you're right. It's a matter of authority, and it's a matter, we don't see, from my understanding, if we were to see a Satan ruling the earth, we would have to be shown the Lord sitting above, ruling in the heavens. We would have to be, exposed to both of those elements. This is why when Jesus was, after he was done fasting, the devil came to him and tempted him and told him to turn, if you're, God, turn this rock into bread. And then said, if you worship me, you can have all the kingdoms of all the earth, showing him the kingdoms that were to come and were on the earth. Obviously, he said, follow the commandment, Satan, you should only worship the Lord that is in heaven. And if there would be an admittance of the devil, there would have to be an admittance of God being in existence.
Yes, I think you make a very good point, and that's actually the direction in which I'm going with this. We actually have the authority of man spelled out in Scripture for us. The scope of man's authority, according to the Bible, is earth. We see that in Genesis 1:26, where it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on earth." Again, in Genesis 2:19, we read, "Out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called each living creature, that was its name." So God gave Adam dominion, and he gave Adam the keepsake or the caretaking over the planet, all the creatures that are in the planet. And that was in the Garden of Eden. And so obviously there was no death and there was no violence. There was no contention between the species. There was harmony, and which, of course, we're going to come full circle to that scenario again when Jesus comes back. But for those who might make the argument, well, that was in the Garden of Eden, God reiterates, after the flood, he reiterates this mandate of dominion for the human race, not just for Adam. He reiterates it to Noah after the flood. So after the flood, when all the animals were now feral, wild, and bloodthirsty, and there was contention in the earth, and there was death, God, which there was obviously before the flood too, but definitely after the flood, things changed, and God reiterates man's authority. He reiterates the same thing he told to Adam. He gives the same mandate to Noah. And of course, just as we're all the children of Adam, we're certainly all the children of Noah. So we have maintained this authority, and then nowhere through Scripture is there ever any indication that the human race has lost the authority that God originally gave to us. We're not as wise as we once were. We're not as intelligent as we once were, but nonetheless we maintain this authority. That's the authority of mankind, is the earth. Now let's talk about the authority of Satan, because the authority of Satan is also delineated in Scripture. And the authority of Satan is described as the world or the kingdoms of men. And understand that when the Bible talks about the world, it's a very distinct thing. It's a very distinct concept from the earth. The world represents the kingdoms of men. He's also called the prince of the power of the air and the God of this age. We know that the Bible says that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness therein. So Satan does not own the planet. God owns the planet. God owns everything in creation. But the authority of Satan is actually spelled out in the Scriptures also. In Luke we read, then the devil taking him up on a high mountain showed him, referring to Jesus, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, all this authority I will give you and their glory. For this has been delivered to me, or this has been given to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. So the question is, when we read this passage, who gave Satan the authority over the nations that he was showing Jesus? Well, I think that the answer, I think, is pretty clear. When you take the Bible in its totality and you also look at what's happening now, the answer is we did. The human race did. The devil, the devil cannot take from us. He cannot usurp our authority from us, direct usurpation. He can't steal it from us. Just like if you're a believer in Christ, the devil cannot steal your salvation away from you. That's something that he does not have the authority or the power to do that. The same in terms of the authority that we've been given dominion over the earth. He cannot steal that from us. However, he can deceive us into abdicating our authority to him. And that's called ruling from behind the throne. We can abdicate our authority to him. Jesus also said in John 14, I will no longer talk much with you, for the ruler of this world is coming. Again, the prince of the power of the air, the God of this age, the ruler of the world, the kingdoms of men. And then he also says, Jesus also says in John, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And so the devil has dominion over the affairs of men, over the nations, in as much as we abdicate to him the authority. In other words, that's why you have this dynamic where if you have a righteous king or you have righteous judges over a nation, then the blessings of God can come to that nation. But if you have evil rulers, if you have evil individuals that are governing nations, which in almost every case they're occultic, they are purposely or indirectly, directly or indirectly, opening a gateway for the devil to have influence in whatever it is that they're governing. So this is the question of authority. So we have the human race has authority over the earth, but the devil has authority over the kingdoms of men when and where that authority is abdicated to him. Now the most amazing thing is the authority of Jesus. The authority of Jesus is a very profound and powerful revelation. In Matthew, Jesus says, all authority has been given to me, and he makes this statement, in heaven and on earth. So Jesus not only has all the authority in heaven, he also has all authority on earth. Now, why would that be? Now, God has never taken away, has never gone back on the authority that he's given to the human race. So Jesus, being fully human and the Son of God, has both all authority on earth as a human and all authority in heaven as the Son of God. That's why when Jesus comes back to rule the nations, he comes back and he rules the Bible tells us in the book of Revelations that Jesus comes back and he rules from the city of David. Not only does he rule from the city of David, Jesus ruled from the throne of David, the throne that was promised and prophesied to him, David's seed. Jesus is the fulfillment of that prophecy. And when he comes back, he will literally sit. This is not a metaphor thing. Jesus will literally sit on a throne, a physical throne, and that throne will literally be located in the city of David. And it will literally be the throne of David. Jesus has all authority to rule on earth, and he is coming to do just that. He's coming to rule the nations. In John it says, Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world," of course, responding to Pontius Pilate. "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom," he says, "now my kingdom is not from here, because in the future it will be. He will be here, and he will be governing the nation." So you have this issue of authority, and it really is the key to understanding why certain things happen, why other things don't happen. Because I always ask the question, I always ask people the question whenever I'm doing a presentation is, we refer to the devil as a cheater. Is the devil a cheater? Is it true that the devil is a cheater? When we talk about the cosmic, you could call it the cosmic game that's afoot between the powers of darkness and the kingdom of God, the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of God. So the question is the devil a cheater? And of course, the natural response is yes. But the biblical response is no. You cannot cheat in a game with God. It's impossible. You cannot cheat. He makes the rules, and guess what? He enforces them. So God, if he gives authority to the human race, guess who's going to enforce that authority? God is going to enforce that authority. No matter what the devil tries to do, God will enforce that authority. However, we can abdicate power. Thus, the priesthood. Thus, the occult, the Luciferian priesthood that has existed on this planet since the very beginning, since the days at least of Nimrod and before that of Cain and when that whole genetic line from Adam began to move away from God, began to be insubordinate. They created a kingdom that was not. They created a kingdom in which they abdicated authority and power to the devil, to the fallen angels. And we know that's the case. That's not something you have to speculate or conjecture. That is obviously the case, because all of these pagan civilizations, they all worship the gods. And the Bible calls their idols and their gods, the Bible calls those gods demons or fallen angels. Those are the gods that they worship. And these angels are hiding behind these angels are hiding, they're disguising themselves behind these veneers of Zeus and of Mercury and of all these different entities, these different deities. They're hiding. They're purposely hiding. They cannot show up and take authority away from man, because that would require them going up to heaven and taking authority from God himself, which is absolutely impossible. So they do it through guile. They do it through deception. They entice the nations. The devil entices the nations, just like when he went over to David, when God explicitly instructed David not to take a census of the fighting men in Israel. And the Bible says that the devil himself went to David and he enticed David to take that census. He couldn't force David to do it. He enticed him to be insubordinate against God, because he knew that there would be consequences. From who? From God. So the devil entices David to take the census, and of course the famous story where then the judgment of God comes, and God asks David, would you prefer that I directly judge your people, or I bring a foreign nation to come in and as the instrument of my judgment? And of course David chose God. Very wise decision, by the way, because he knew that God was merciful and would have mercy, and that he could entreat the mercy of God. And that's exactly what he did. Of course, an angel came down from heaven and literally began to strike people dead with a sword. And of course, David, the whole scenario unfolded, and David entreated the mercy of God, and and God withdrew the judgment after a certain point. So that gives us a good insight onto how the devil works and the powers of darkness work with the human race. That's why, by the way, you have this issue. This is, again, something that Pember addresses in his book, is the issue of mediumship, the issue of contacting the spirit world, the issue of what he so rightly calls intercourse with demons. And again, when he uses the term intercourse, he's not necessarily talking about copulation or sexual encounters with demons, although that does happen. He's talking about having interaction with demons. And so isn't it interesting that in order to contact them, we have to do certain things. We have to go and we have to, the mediums, they do their seances and they do their ritualistic practices in order to make contact. It's not just as simple as picking up the phone and dialing some number or going to some certain place on the earth and saying a secret password. They have to actually take the initiative to make contact with this forbidden realm that God forbids us to be in contact with for a very good reason. And so they have to take the initiative. They have to be the ones to go and do it. And when you have this happening on a global, on a national level, let's say Babylon, for instance, Babylon, obviously, Nimrod built the Tower of Babel, or the Gateway of the Gods, and the whole idea behind that was to create a gateway with which or through which to contact the entities in the abyss, and to not only contact them but make a gateway for them to come through. So rather than accepting the governorship of God himself, which is exactly what God wanted to do with Israel, men so often prefer to be governed de facto by fallen angels, by demons. And that's exactly what happens. The occult is always at work behind the scenes. That's why the occult exists. These occult societies and associations, these are not just fancy clubs or places where the elite get together to drink wine and listen to classical music or something, or deliberate about the events, the current events of the world. These occults exist specifically to do two things, and specifically. Number one, to maintain the teaching, the instruction, the mystery schools, as they're called, of the fallen angels that have been taught, that were given to men way back in Genesis 6, and also since then through various methods. That's the first thing. The second thing is to continue the intercourse, to continue the contact with these entities. So when you hear of the Skull and Bones Society, or when you hear of the Illuminati, or when you hear of any of these secret societies and occultic groups, you have to understand that these guys are not playing at a game. These guys are deadly serious about intercourse with the enemy of humanity. You can say it that way because it's true. And the enemy of God, with fallen angels, with entities that actually exist. These aren't things that are in their imagination. These aren't childish whims that these elites have of dressing up in robes and, like I said, playing at occultism. They don't play at occultism. It is very, very real. And there's a video that's been circulating for a number of years, I think, on the internet, where somebody finally got a peek over the wall over at the Skull and Bones inside of their facility. What do they call that? The tomb, or whatever they call that facility over there, where the Skull and Bones is headquartered. And if you watch that video, what you see is it's kind of blurry, it's dark, but you see basically what you're seeing in that video is a group of guys in the courtyard with a woman, and the woman is screaming and frothing, basically demon possessed. And it's very, very demonic. And if any of the listeners have ever had to engage a demonic entity or an unclean spirit, you would recognize immediately that that's what these guys were dealing with. And of course, they weren't engaging this demonic spirit with the intent of casting it out or anything like that. They actually conjure up these spirits. They invite these demonic entities, these unclean spirits, to fill them And they purposely engage in these ceremonies to facilitate that process. That's why you have the famous stories where they have to, lie naked in a coffin with a dead body, specifically referring to the Skull and Bone Society. Why would they do that? Why are they doing that? Is it just so that they can blackmail down the line these politicians and stuff? Well, sure, that's part of it, but the primary reason why they're doing this is because it's like supernatural alchemy. They're creating the gateway through which these entities can come and they can inhabit these people. So, and let me affirm this to you for those who might be doubting that this is actually happening. When you go and you do these occultic rituals, these entities that are behind the scenes, these unclean spirits, which are very different from fallen angels, but these unclean spirits, they're not reluctant to come. They're not shuffling their feet and deciding whether or not they want to come and inhabit. They're waiting for it. They're chomping at the bit. They're waiting for the open door, and as soon as the door is open, these guys are blitzing for it. And so this is a very real, a very dangerous power. And I don't know how I got off into all of this from this issue of authority, but going back to authority, it is so essential to understand. And when I say the authority of the human race, I'm not just talking about Christians. I'm talking about humanity, the authority invested in the human race. It's so key to understand this issue of authority because the devil has to play by the rules. And when you understand that point, you begin to understand, for example, why the part of the Luciferian creed is that they have to tell us everything they're doing to us before they do it. Now, of course, they don't come out openly and do a press conference and say, hey, we're going to kill a million people in the United States with Ebola next year. They don't do. Yeah, exactly. They almost do. They might as well do a press conference because they telegraph this information to us in movies, in books, in billboards, on TV. I mean, they literally bombard us with this information. And the question is why, and nobody really has an answer. Why? Why do they do that? Is it just because it's part of their creed and they have to? No. Because they have to, because I believe, it's my opinion, that God constrains the devil. He is not allowed to usurp our free will. We have to make the choice. It's up to the human race. We have to make the choice. And so we have to choose whether or not we're going to accept this or that. God will never allow any entity. He doesn't even do it himself. He himself will not, he will not encroach upon our free will, and he certainly doesn't allow the devil to do it. It's always willful choice. Always willful choice. And a great example of this is the state at which we currently find our nation. We willfully, not probably most of the listeners listening to this program, but our nation, I shouldn't say the vast majority, over half of the populace of our nation chose to elect a man who obviously had a lot of skeletons in his closet, who was obviously a socialist, borderline communist, just because of his rhetoric, we chose to elect this person, and so to a degree, we basically deserve what we get by the officials that we elect. And I'm going to take a break there if you guys want to. I didn't mean to ramble on.
No, this is good. We do get the government we work for, earn, and deserve, and we certainly have gotten it. And it's interesting how you pointed out that there are rules, and kind of going back to what you said.
Looked at Job. That is a great example of the authority of the Lord, sovereign authority over all things on earth, whether it's Satan or man, because Job was going to be afflicted. Satan, came to say, Job only blesses you because he is blessed by gifts, and that's the only reason in the family. That's the only reason that he worships you. Take it away from him. And the Lord says, no, Satan, you take it away from him. And he does that, and Job still doesn't curse the Lord, and Satan comes back to him and says, well, he has his health still. he's still alive, and strike him down. And the Lord says, no, Satan, you touch him, but do not take his life. And you see in the parameters which the Lord allows certain things to happen.
That's right.
And that's just one of the great examples of how what you were talking about, Tim.
That's right, and that's why it's so crucial to understand the issue of authority, to be able to put the pieces together. For example, let me give you a good example. For anybody that's followed the alien question or the alien agenda or the UFO situation or ufology, a lot of people, a lot of the ufologists, this is the biggest question this is probably the biggest question that they grapple with, is if these beings exist, if these entities exist, these ultra-intelligent entities that are obviously far more intelligent than us, using far more sophisticated weaponry and vehicles and technology than we are, what are they waiting for? Why don't they just either blow us away or just take over the earth, subjugate us, enslave us like the Romans would do to the Gauls and the different barbaric tribes? What are they waiting for? This is the issue that everybody wrestles with. And for those of you who are familiar with ufology, you're going to hear this over and over and over. They're wrestling with this issue. And they come up with all kind of wild, speculative, crazy conjectures as to why these entities have not yet taken us over. And one of their most popular ones is because they're farming us like animals or whatever. But no matter how you cut it, it would still be a lot easier for them to come and just subjugate us all with their superior technology. So what's the deal? Why is it that these powerful beings are always constrained? It's authority. They're not allowed to. It's a very simple principle. They're not permitted to, and they cannot usurp what God gave to us. It has to be abdicated. And so God will not allow them. He will not allow it to happen. And this may be a clue to what the restrainer is in the Bible. When the Bible refers to the restrainer, that somewhere in the New Testament, that the restrainer will be lifted at some point in time. And I'm not saying that is what it is. I'm saying it could be, and perhaps it's just starting to register in people's minds that this issue of authority maybe is starting to put a lot of other things into place. But that's why. Because, listen, there is no question. One thing that we can say with certainty is that there exist entities, beings that are far superior to us in both intellectual capacity and technological capacity. Remember, even angels use technology. That was one of the very bizarre things that I had to come to terms with in the beginning. You talk about a sword, you talk about a chariot. You're talking about technology. If an angel's riding in a chariot, that is a form of technology. There's a reason why that angel is riding in a chariot, or the wheel within the wheel. The famous passage that talks about the wheel within a wheel, and this whole description about how these entities were riding inside of or on top of or whatever, the wheel within the wheel. And that is a reference to some kind of technology. We have the wrong idea about technology, by the way. We view technology, and we have a version of technology that is primarily mechanic in nature. We make things explode to make our technology work. That is a barbaric form of technology.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. The world of physics in the Bible, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but the world of physics in the Bible is different than our understanding of the world in which we live. In other words, you spoke of, for example, dimensions. In the Bible, I think one can make a relatively reasonable argument for interdimensional travel, even anti-gravitic travel. Now, without getting into a lot of, maybe I shouldn't have brought this up, but maybe you can save me from myself, Tim. I'm
glad
sure.
You did. I'm glad you did. You actually pointed me right in the direction that. You actually affirmed the direction that I was going in here.
Okay. the reason I bring this up is what you're doing by listening to this program, and this is kind of the basis of this is why I think this is so important, and I'm so passionate about this. I have had people tell me, Doug, you are wasting your time. If it's not an issue of salvation, you're wasting your time. I don't want to hear it. Basically, I've been told to shut up so many times, and not just by my wife either. No, she never does that. But here's the thing. To me, and Tim, you can take it from here. But we as Christians are going to undergo this great deception. We are being told, or the answers can be found in a proper understanding of the Bible, including the days of Noah, pre-Adamic civilization, the dimensions that referenced in the Bible, all of these things that are going on in the Bible, and we can't save ourselves from this deception or be saved from this deception by watching what the Luciferians are doing and they're trying to tell us, and by comparing it to the King James Version of the Bible. I believe that what's taking place here are the Luciferians, the people that are in power, the power elite, are counterfeiting exactly what's in the Bible. That might not be the correct terminology.
No, that is the exact terminology, because if you want to understand I always say, if you want to understand what the devil's doing, take your Bible and turn it upside down. That's what he's doing. He wants to usurp ultimately, and this is again this issue of authority. He ultimately would love to usurp the throne promised to Jesus and the governance over the planet, and he has a plan to do just that. And even constrained by the rules of the game, he has a plan to do just that. I want everyone to remember this issue that we have in the book of Daniel in the Bible, where Daniel's praying and Gabriel is sent to communicate with Daniel, and Gabriel is hindered by the Prince of Persia, some kind of this powerful fallen angelic entity, who's referred to as the Prince of Persia, perhaps what the Bible calls a principality, and Daniel is hindered, and people just gloss over that. Daniel's hindered, by the Prince of Persia, to the extent where Michael has to come and contend with the Prince of Persia so that Daniel can get the message through. I slam on the brakes when I read stuff like that, and I throw the gear in reverse and go back and say, what? Wait a minute. Gabriel was hindered. I thought that he just blinks an eye and poof, he's standing next to Daniel, and then he blinks again and he's back up in heaven. So obviously there is a dimensional realm that must be traversed in order to get from point A to point B. So this, again, going back to this issue of technology, we have the wrong idea of technology. We think that technology is an invention of humanity, that the human race created technology. No. Much of the technology that we have comes from the instruction, and even, let me say this, even the blueprints of the fallen angels. And again, this ties back in, and I know I'm, again, not really detailing the antediluvian world, but this ties back into the antediluvian world, where a time in which I believe was there existed high technology. And when I say high technology, understand that I'm talking about flying vehicles, aeronautical vehicles. I'm talking about weapons of war, advanced weapons of war. I'm talking about stargates. I'm talking about a world that was connected, that was networked by technology that supersedes the mechanical, make things explode technology that we have today. And the technology that they were using was directly taught to them and given to them by the fallen watchers, who, by the way, are no longer present on the earth. Some people forget that those, according to the book of Enoch, those 200 watchers are chained in chains of darkness, and are reserved, waiting for the day of judgment. So those guys are no longer walking around. God was swift to judge those beings, those watchers, except for one of them. Well, he was also judged, but interestingly enough, we can't go into this now, but Azazel was actually buried in the desert of Dudael and covered with sharp stones, and there's a whole fascinating study on that correlates with the Bible. But back to this issue of technology. So, like I was saying in the last broadcast with Steve, is that the ancient world was not, we got to get this imagery out of our head of guys walking around in sandals clothed in animal skins. Yes, God clothed Adam and Eve in animal skins. That was a representation of the covering of the blood of Jesus that was to come through the cross. But these guys advanced very, very, very quickly with their technology. Why? Because there was an incursion of angels, of watchers into humanity, not only literally through their progeny, which were the Nephilim, which were the giants or the hybrids, or however you want to refer to them, but also these entities, these watchers, were governing the world from behind the thrones of their children, who certainly governed the world. These giants took over very, very quickly, not to the point where they were eating each other. And not only were they eating each other, but part of the judgment that came down from God through Enoch was that they were going to destroy one another. They were going to make war with one another. And one of the archangels was sent down, according to the book of Enoch, and basically incited conflict between the different factions of these hybrids. Let's just call them hybrids. By the way, I wanted to point out, and I'm going to get back to what you were referencing, Doug. I just want to set up some background for it. By the way, it's very important to understand that there was a very significant expanse of time when this was happening. The book of Enoch tells us that the watchers came down in the days of Jared. So these guys came down in the days of Jared. Interestingly enough, the name Jared means shall come down. So in the days of Jared, these 200 watchers come down. The name Jared means shall come down. And they were on the planet from the days of Jared, at least their progeny was on the planet from the days of Jared to the time of the flood. I have a name for this period in time. I call this the Empire of the Gods. I believe that this is the golden age that is referenced by the occult and in all the ancient pagan religions. The golden age refers to the time where the gods came down and mingled with men, and the progeny of the gods, the hybrids, the god-men, were ruling the earth. I call this Empire of the Gods. Of course, the New Age and the occult, they refer to the golden age as this time of enlightenment, this wonderful time where there was great advancement, technological advancement on the earth, and they're right on that account. They are right on that account. So the golden age, so you have this incursion of fallen angels in the days of Jared. These guys are ruling the earth de facto through their progeny. These are the powers behind the throne, and their progeny were leading the human race in the worship of their fathers. And of course, the human race was also worshiping the progeny, was worshiping these hybrids who they viewed as demigods. So yes, the demigods did exist. They were the progeny of the fallen angels. And here's the astounding thing, the thing that I really want people to understand. According to the Greek Septuagint, which I referenced earlier, there's for some reason Masoretic text, which is the text of the Bible that most of us have, it subtracts 100 years from the genealogies that are laid out in the book of Genesis from Adam to Noah, and actually from Adam to Shem. So for some reason it subtracts 100 years. If you take the record as laid out by the Septuagint, some people have calculated, and there's various different ways of calculating this. Some people have calculated that there were about 3,000 years from Adam to the flood. That's the high end of the calculations I've seen. The lower end of the calculations, and according to the calculations that I did myself, based on some work that other people have done, is at least 2,256 years from Adam to Shem, or from Adam to the flood. Over 2,000 years from Adam to the flood. Again, it could be 3,000 years. So from the days of Jared to the flood, we're talking about over 1,000 years And I think that is a relatively conservative estimate. So imagine this. The Golden Age lasted for over 1,000 years. Now, you tell me, what could be accomplished with the knowledge of angels, especially with their progeny that were certainly more intelligent than we are, because they had angel genes, and were probably also multidimensional to a degree because they had angel genes, that these fallen angel and their progeny were ruling the earth and were on the earth for over 1,000 years. That is going to represent an explosion in technology and knowledge. Remember, they taught all kinds of knowledge to the human race. Again, going back to what I said in the beginning, it's astounding that God refers to the knowledge that they taught as the worthless secrets, the worthless knowledge. Nonetheless, we're talking about technological, sophisticated knowledge. We're talking about the kind of technology that we, and this is where we're going to begin to connect the dots, are in the days in which we live now, we are deriving the technology that we are using now from the technology that existed then.
You think about that, folks. Please, just think about what he just said, what Timothy Alvarino just said about the knowledge now versus the knowledge then. By the way, Mr. Alvarino, we had Stan Deo on Tuesday. Now, Stan Deo had actually did a conference where he found the Garden of Eden, and I believe, based on the evidence that he put forth, he actually did find the real Garden of Eden. The reason I mention that is he, during his presentation on Tuesday, put the flood at 2345 A.D. based on his calculations. And I'm not sure what you just said. It was 22 something or within. Yeah,
I came to a close figure, close to the figure he had. I have 2,256 years.
Okay, so yes,
yeah,
wow.
Ballpark.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, and I think he's right. He's probably got I'm sure he has a way more accurate calculation than I do. He's far more well versed in a lot of the geological stuff, especially the geological stuff, than I am. But it is amazing to think about that, though. 1,000 years. We can't. I mean, it's hard for us to even imagine what 1,000 years is like. We live, if we're lucky, 100 years. So 1,000 years. There was 1,000 years on this planet where basically these watchers and their progeny were running amok. And aside from the profane wickedness that was spreading all over the globe, there was also an incredible acceleration of technological knowledge. And that's why we have these legends of Atlantis. That's why we have these legends of Shambhala. That's why we have these legends of all these ancient civilizations that were said to possess very advanced technology. And not only did they possess advanced technology, all of these advanced civilizations were said to be governed by and inhabited by the children of the gods, the God-men. In almost every case. In fact, I'm just going to say, in every case, it would be very difficult to find a case that refers to one of these ancient civilizations, these ancient cities such as Atlantis, such as Shambhala, such as these other ones that are escaping my memory right now. But there's a dozen of them. The empires, the Osirian Empire, and the cities that exist, the great cities of the Osirian Empire, that did not involve the progeny of the gods, that did not involve the God-men. That is why there was an explosion of technology, because there was an explosion of knowledge. And it was not knowledge that God was giving, it was knowledge that these fallen angels were giving. And I promise, Doug, I'm going to get back to the issue that you raised there with the gravitational thing and all that. But now listen, I know we're coming up on a break, right? At 8? All right.
Yep. Yeah.
9.
Yep.
I wanted to read this real quick just to put into perspective. Let me find it here real quick. This issue of knowledge, because of course we have this saying, and we're taught in school. I remember in my grade school or in my middle school, there's the huge phrase, painted on the wall of our cafeteria, knowledge is power. And, of course, I really didn't understand what that meant back then. But my God, is it true? Knowledge is power. But it's not the kind of power that it's an inferior power. The knowledge that these fallen angels, the power that comes through the knowledge that is derived from the fallen angels is indeed power. It is a very potent power, but it is nothing in comparison to the power that comes to the knowledge of the gospel. Let me read this real quick here from George Pember. Knowledge in this life is a gift fraught with peril. I want you to imagine, as I'm reading this, the Luciferians and the global elite that are sitting on all this technology and ancient knowledge that think they're so high and mighty. Knowledge in this life is a gift fraught with peril. For our great task here is to learn the lesson of absolute dependence upon God and entire submission to His will. His dealings with us now are to the end that He may withdraw us from our own purposes and hide pride from us. But knowledge, unless it be accompanied by a mighty outpouring of grace, causes undue elation. It was the vision of knowledge which filled the breast of our first parent with impious aspirations and made her listen to the tempter when he bade her hope to be as God. And it is an ominous fact that after the fall, the first inventors of the arts and sciences were the descendants not of the believing Seth, but of the deist and murderer Cain. So in our own days, the leaders of science are too often the leaders of infidelity, the despisers of God and of prayer. Except by special grace, man seems incapable of bearing the slightest weight of power upon his shoulders without losing his balance. I think that's a very profound statement by Pember there.
Yeah, I do as well. And I can see Joe nodding, yeah.
With that, Tim, we are at the top of the hour. We'll take that break now. So get yourself a glass of water. Be back in about 3 or 4 minutes. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report with our special guest, Tim Alberino, talking about the beginning of the creation of the world, of the Lord's creation of the world, and how it fits in with today, as it is very important, the connections from the fallen world, the world before the flood, and what happened there to what we are seeing happening in our world today. It is undeniably and scripturally tied together, as we were told. And saw Nimrod try to establish a one-world government against God, but was thwarted in his efforts, just as Satan will be this time around. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report. We'll be right back after these short messages.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to draw your attention to American Survival Wholesale. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, our partners in this radio endeavor. Let me tell you something. We've got to take care of our pets during an emergency. They've developed the bridge for pets, the bridge for dogs. Very simply put, there is emergency long-term food storage for your feline pets or for your canine pets. Wouldn't it be horrible to realize at that moment in time that you did not care for your pets? Folks, as crazy as it sounds, you might think, well, they could have my scraps. No. Look, we have to think of them as our alarm systems, our first alert systems, in addition to being family members, of course. At least that's the way I look at my dog, as a family member. And I'll tell you, he looks at me, I look at him, we lock eyes, and it's almost as if we know what each other is thinking. But the great folks at American Survival Wholesale have put together something called the Bridge, emergency long-term dog food, as well as cat food, just to fill in those gaps when our four-legged friends are in need. There's up to 180 servings of dog and cat food. Some people have ADT alarms. We have dog alarms, shall we say. Made in the USA with quality ingredients, 15-year shelf life. I can go on and on. Contains up to 6 months of pet food, depending on the size of your pet. And there's a table that they have. It's just fantastic. They think of everything. While you're there, folks, also look at the Trading Post number 2. You've got to start thinking of food as money. I'm going to tell you something. With what we're talking about tonight, and this third hour, you're going to see how things are going to connect and understand the direness of the hour. So take this time now when it's relatively quiet, and go shopping at AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com and tell them Doug and Joe sent you. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
And gentlemen, hour number 3 of the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this Thursday, August 7th, 2014. Our special guest, Timothy Alberino. You can find his work at stevequayle.com. And to mention, tomorrow we'll be joined by Steve also. He will be joining us for our Friday edition. But tonight we're talking about the pre-Adamic world. We were talking about the fall of the angels, known as the Nephilim, and how it relates into our world today, what we are seeing play out before our eyes. Is it a repeat of what we saw before the flood, or what happened before the flood? And I'm just going to let you jump right back in, Tim, in this third hour and take it away.
Okay, let me make a couple more points on the Empire of the Gods. This period of time from the days of Jared to the flood, when the Watchers were present on the earth and their progeny were governing. Now, let me remind you what I said before, that we can't be, our authority cannot be usurped by force. So maybe some people were confused when I said that there was this time, this 1,000-year period at least, when the earth was being governed by these hybrid entities. Well, here's the key to understanding this. This is precisely part of the reason why the Watchers came. I made a point last time I was on with you guys, that the Watchers had two specific things in mind, and the Book of Enoch tells us this very clearly. Two motives, let's call them, for taking an oath and coming down and being insubordinate against God and mingling with the human women, is, number one, it was sexual. There was a sexual drive. That's easy to understand. That these fallen entities, they lusted after these women. That's the way it's written, and that's as simple as it is. But the second is a little more complicated. The second reason, the second motive, is they wanted to have children. Now, why did they want to have children? Remember the issue of authority. They cannot take authority from us, but they can infiltrate. They can make their way into our, let's say, our realm of authority, our scope of authority, so that they then can wield a more direct control over the affairs of the earth, over the affairs of the kingdoms of men. And how did they do that? Of course, they had sexual relations with women, and they produced through these women gave birth to hybrids that were part angel, part human, thereby retaining, let me just put it this way, they were human enough to claim authority, human authority, at least to a degree. And that puts a piece of the puzzle in there. That's a very important reason why, in my opinion, why these Watchers wanted to do what they did, because now they were not only governing from behind thrones, influencing the affairs of men, now they had a direct line through their progeny. Now they had children that were loyal to them, that were human enough to govern, to exact a more literal dominance over the earth.
Can we say this? I'm sorry to interrupt, but can we say this is the line of Cain, the lineage of Cain?
Well, I would refer to the lineage of Cain as something distinct from what these particular 200 Watchers did. This is a very encapsulated situation. When you talk about the Watchers, the 200 Watchers that the Book of Enoch refers to and that Genesis 6 refers to, that is a very specific occurrence. Now, it may be that other incursions into the human genome happened before that. Those are mainly speculations. I myself hold some of those hold some opinions concerning that. But what we know about the 200 angels, what they did was a very specific encroachment of the planet, and coming in and doing what they did, taking wives and having children. That was let's put it this way, that was a very specific offense. And we know that offense was so specific, in fact, that God decided to put a stop to it right away and to judge those angels. Remember, the devil has not yet been judged. A lot of these other entities have not yet been judged. These 200 angels were judged relatively quickly. Of course, they had 1,000 years to run amok, but they were judged before the flood, and they were bound and put away with before humanity was reset again. So they did something unique. They did something special. They did something, in fact, that in the book of Enoch it says that their judgment was visible to the angels, at least to Michael and the archangels. They could see these guys, these 200 watchers, in torment, in judgment. They could actually look at them as they were being tormented in the place of judgment that God put them before the flood. And it was so bad that the book of Enoch relates how the angels had to turn their faces away because it was so horrendous, the torment that these watchers were going through. So that shows you what God thought about that situation. He brought swift judgment to that situation, and he put these entities away. He put these watchers away very quickly. And so this is a very specific case, this empire of the gods. However, the Bible says that, Genesis 6 says that the Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also afterwards. So obviously we have these giants showing up again to a lesser degree, to a lesser scale. These are genetically I believe, in my opinion, these are genetically degraded from their fathers, from the original children of the fallen angels, who were, of course, the best specimens. They were the first. And so this is the empire of the gods, and this is why these watchers, one of the reasons why these watchers wanted to have children was because they knew that by combining their, whatever you want to call it, their genetic material with human genetics, they could create a hybrid creature that could interact on the human plane with the human race and with human authority on a different level than they themselves were able to. That's a key point I wanted to make sure that I explained before I moved on.
Thank you.
And that's actually...
Thank you. That does answer a question that I had, and I think, Tim, I didn't mean to overtalk you, but I think that it's important for people to understand what you just said in terms of that very specific agenda.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Agenda. That was the agenda.
Right.
And you know what? That clip that you just played, it just triggered this in my mind. That clip that you just played of President Kennedy addressing the secret societies. He made a statement, and this is a phenomenal, and this is an exceedingly important statement that he made. I want everybody to listen to the statement that he made and consider this statement in the context of the way that the enemy is interacting with the human race. He said, concerning these secret societies, infiltration instead of invasion. Infiltration instead of invasion. And now we're getting back around to what you were touching on, Doug, about the technology. Listen, we have to understand infiltration instead of invasion, because invasion is impossible because of authority. God put the parameters in place, and no man and no angel and no hybrid can overcome or supersede or do away with the parameters that God has put into place. They have to play by the rules. Infiltration instead of invasion. Infiltration is what happened in Genesis 6. The infiltration of this genetic seed, the infiltration of a new kind of what I refer to these entities as unsanctioned. These are unsanctioned entities referring to the progeny of the fallen angels from Genesis 6. They're unsanctioned. Why are they unsanctioned? God never created them. He never intended for them to exist. They are unsanctioned, which gives you some insight into the way that the mechanisms of life work. God has created mechanisms. A plus B equals C. If a man and a woman copulate, you're supposed to get offspring. So there's mechanisms in place that these fallen angels were utilizing to create unsanctioned creatures. So I want everybody to remember, if you hear anything I'm saying tonight, remember this: infiltration instead of invasion, and unsanctioned creatures, unsanctioned entities, because we're dealing with, in the days in which we live right now, we are dealing with, again, infiltration instead of invasion, and we're dealing with unsanctioned creatures. And here's what I mean. Those of you who are, I'm a somewhat of a student, I'm an amateur in what could be considered Nazi lore, Nazi history, because what happened with the Nazis was so crucial, critical to understanding exactly, in many ways, exactly what's happening now. Of course, the famous saying, history repeats itself, and indeed it does, and indeed it is. Because the Nazis, first and foremost, and I'm not going to go too deeply into this because I could talk for 6 hours about this, but the Nazism, you have to understand that Nazism, first and foremost, was a religion. It was first and foremost an occultic religion. Before it was a political movement or a political party or a government, it was first and foremost a religion. It was birthed out of the Thule Society, or some people call it the Thule or the Thule Society, which existed in Germany prior to the conception of the Nazi Party. And in fact, the Thule Society, which actually it was using the swastika symbol before the Nazis adopted it from the Thule Society. The Thule Society believed that their people, that the German people, were ancestors of the God-men, that they were the descendancy, the heritage of the God-men they believed that came from Atlantis. And so that was the religion. That was what was pulsating behind Nazism. It wasn't some far right political ideology. No, that is a foolish that is a foolish contrivance of political talking heads who don't know anything about the occult. Nazism was birthed out of the occult, and there's a very, very interesting story that probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with, involving the Vril Society and Maria Orsic. And the Vril Society was basically a society of mediums. These were women that were contacting and in contact with supernatural powers. Long story short, there's actually a story and there's some corroborating evidence, and this is fairly well known. For people who doubt this, they can go and do a search on it. There's some really good documentaries out there that cover this issue. The ladies of the Vril Society, to make a long story short, actually made contact with entities. They believed that these entities were aliens from a distant star system. They made contact with supernatural entities, and these entities literally gave them, the Vril Society women, they dictated to them blueprints, not just some ethereal message like you often get coming from the New Age or the Theosophical Society. They literally dictated, by the way, in ancient, they dictated these blueprints in two languages. One was in ancient Sumerian, the other was in the secret codified language of the Knights Templar, and they were able to decode this message that came through mediumship, that came through intercourse with demons, and this message was laying out technological blueprints for flying saucers and for other craft. And so this technological blueprint that was acquired through mediumship, through intercourse with demons, was actually put into production, and they actually were able to produce the craft for which the blueprints were written. And of course, we have this whole the Nazi lore of the UFOs and all this. It's true. It is true, and I can't go into all the proofs and reasons why it's true, but it is absolutely true. When you talk about the when you talk about New Schwabenland and what they're doing in Antarctica. By the way, I think Antarctica is covered under ice for a very good reason. I think God did that. There's some pretty profound stuff under the ice in Antarctica, and I think it comes from the antediluvian world. So the Nazis actually took these. The point is this: they took the blueprints that came from, again, what Pember would refer to as intercourse with demons. These were working blueprints that you could create advanced technology with, and they did so. And this, obviously, those who are familiar with these, there's lots of stories like this that came from the Nazis. Obviously, Project Paperclip, where we brought in the different intellectuals and scientists and engineers from Germany. We didn't put them on trial like all the other Nazis. Instead, we went in and we brought them over because we wanted their technology, we wanted their knowledge, the most famous of which was Werner von Braun, and who actually, along with Hermann Oberth, who was basically his instructor, he studied under Hermann Oberth and was instructed by Hermann Oberth, both of them attested to the fact that they had help in designing and manufacturing, producing some of the weaponry. And of course, they were alluding to not only the rockets, but they were also alluding to the what people would call UFO technology, or flying saucer technology. So the reason why, and believe me, I barely scratched the surface with that, and I probably did a very, very clumsy job with it. But just understand this. Just understand this about what I just said. The Nazis, the Vril Society, contacted the spiritual world, had intercourse with demons. They got actual functional blueprints to create flying saucer technology. Understand that. And remember what I just said. We're talking about infiltration instead of invasion. Now, I was getting into studying this stuff pretty heavily. The whole UFO thing, the connection between the UFO thing, all the alien question and all this stuff as it related to the antediluvian world. And right in the midst of doing this study, I was even studying the propulsion systems, Doug. I was even studying the anti-gravitical propulsion systems and all these other mathematics and stuff that people who claim to have been at Area 51 and the different facilities, different underground bases were leaking, right? So I was studying all of this, and a lot of it's really hard to swallow because obviously the question is how could they keep something like that secret for so long? And I'm in the midst of, me and my brother-in-law actually, were in the midst of looking at this stuff and studying. We were talking about it all the time, and he was sort of my sounding board, my brother-in-law Tony, when I was back in Cleveland, living in Cleveland. And we're talking about this stuff all the time and just going over, because he's a mechanical-minded guy, going over some of the possible propulsion systems that the secret government was using behind the scenes in the underground bases and all this different stuff. The TR-3Bs and the TR-4Bs and all this different technology. And right in the midst of that, something very unusual happened. My brother-in-law and I were driving from Cleveland to the town in which I grew up. We were going to, I think it's called GCN, the supplement store they sell supplements for people who work out. We were going to buy some supplements. And this is the town I grew up in, Brook Park, Ohio. And we're driving down the road, coming into Brook Park, and there's a shopping complex in Brook Park. It's like a strip mall. And as we're approaching, it's probably, I would say, if my memory serves me right, I think it was around 9 o'clock at night. It was dark, and it was in the winter. We're approaching the shopping complex, and as we're getting closer, we noticed this massive craft was hovering above the shopping complex. We thought it was one of those transport helicopters. I don't know what those are called with the double blades. You know what I'm talking about? Where they can actually transport not only people, but they can actually transport vehicles and stuff in them. Those big double-bladed helicopters. We thought it was one of those because it was so big, and it was literally hovering above one of the buildings in the shopping complex. It was probably only 100 feet in the air above this complex, and we were talking about something, and we stopped short, and we're looking at this thing. Of course, we're saying, what in the world is that? What are they doing? Why do they have a huge transport helicopter hovering above the shopping center At first we thought it was some kind of a drill. We thought maybe they were running some kind of a drill. So the first thing that we did, we're getting pretty close now to the driveway to pull into the shopping complex. The first thing we did was we rolled down the window to listen for the propeller blades, because obviously it should have been extremely loud, being that low to the ground, hovering that low to the ground with these massive propellers. What we thought was a helicopter. So we rolled down our window, and there's nothing, no sound whatsoever. And now we're starting to get very curious about this, because this can't be a helicopter, at least not any kind of helicopter that we've ever heard of, a large helicopter like this, making no sound whatsoever, hovering over the shopping complex. Let me tell you something, Doug. I could have taken a stone and thrown it at it and hit it.
Wow.
That's how low it was. And we pulled into the driveway of the shopping complex, and I don't even know how I got in there, because I had to go through a light, and I was so vexed by this craft hovering in the sky that my eyes were just fixated on it as I'm driving into the parking lot. And I and it was nighttime, and it was windy and cold. That's the other thing. It was very windy and cold, and this thing wasn't moving an inch. And there wasn't many people out in the parking lot because it was so windy and cold, and it was nighttime. So I just threw the car and parked, and we just literally sat back in our chairs, and our jaws dropped as we're looking at this craft. Now remember, this was right in the middle of us studying and looking into the gravitational technology and all this supposed UFO technology. I know all about Roswell. I know all about all the different Rendlesham Forest and all these different UFO stories. So I was very well versed in what people had seen, what they had been seeing, what they're still seeing, the different kinds of technology that people thought that might be in play. So I have all this going through my head as I'm looking at this craft. And this craft came even lower after I parked my car in the parking lot, descended even lower, and came directly over me and my brother-in-law. I was in the driver's seat, and he's sitting next to me in the passenger seat. I'm telling you, our jaws are just dropped. We're just looking out the front windshield at this craft, because now it's directly over us, and it's descending. Now it's only 50 feet above us, and it's descending right over us. We didn't know if it was going to land right on top of us or what it was doing, but it was almost as if it came to where we could see it, where there would be no question about what we were looking at. It was that close. This thing had body armor, like if you've seen the Batman movies, the new Batman movies, the Batmobile, that tank that he drives around in. It had that kind of body armor on it that was a dark greenish color, and it was obviously stealthy, meant to be stealthy. And I had the intuition that this was military, although there were no markings on it. Now, here's the incredible thing. No propulsionary system whatsoever could be observed. Nothing. No propellers. There wasn't any kind of wind coming out of it, like I forget what those jets are called that can take off right from the ground, but they create a tremendous amount of wind. They blow cars out of the way and everything like that. Nothing like this whatsoever. This had no visible propulsion system whatsoever, and it was obviously a winged craft of some sort, but it was literally just oscillating very, very slowly left and right, turning without tipping its wings or anything. Obviously, this was a craft that had some kind of high technology involved that was probably very top secret. I was pretty sure it was military, and it wasn't using any propulsion systems that we know of. There was no sound coming out of it whatsoever. And, we were wide awake. And just for the record, I've never done a drug in my life, never smoked marijuana or anything. So I'm looking at this thing knowing this is technology from them. That's what was resonating in my spirit. This technology is not human. This technology came from an alternate source. And I believe that God for some reason, arranged the events so that vehicle would be there. Right, and what are the chances? I've never seen anything like that in my life, right in the middle of studying this stuff. It just so happens for the very first time, this is the very first time my brother-in-law and I had ever gone to this store together in the town I grew up in. Never saw anything like this in my life. And there it is. Not only is it in plain view, it's literally hovering above us and descending over us in plain view. And
that's incredible. Let me stop you there. Based on what you know now, what you knew then, your research, everything combined, what was it? Who made it? Who created it? Who was piloting it, or whatever you want to call it? What was it?
Well, I believe that I'm pretty certain. In fact, I can say that I'm absolutely certain that it was technology that it was military grade technology in the sense of the military was operating that vehicle. The military was controlling that vehicle. I had a very distinct sense of that was the case in this particular scenario. And because this craft had just hovered over us, and then it slowly made its way down towards, ironically, the John Glenn NASA Center, towards that direction over by the Hopkins International Airport in Cleveland, Ohio. It slowly descended, and we probably sat there and looked at it for, I'd say, at least a solid minute, and that's probably a lowballed estimate. At least a solid minute we're staring at this thing descending over us. We can see it had triangular lights, it had blue and green lights, and my brother-in-law, after about a minute, started fidgeting for his phone. We just realized, hey, we got to get a picture of this. He starts to fidget for his phone. As soon as he starts to fidget for his phone, this thing starts to move away. But it didn't shoot away at an incredible pace like you might expect. It just sort of hovered down over the horizon of the houses towards the John Glenn NASA Center. Now, to your question, I believe this was technology that we acquired from non-human entities, from some kind of a demonic source, in the same way that the Nazis, perhaps it was Nazi technology that we worked with and perfected, or whatever. It wasn't, I've seen pictures of TR-3Bs. It wasn't a TR-3B for the listeners that might be curious. It was the size of one of those double-bladed helicopters, those big transport helicopters. I don't know if it was a drone or not, but I had the distinct feeling that the Lord purposely, that was a divine appointment, so that I would go right at that moment and see this vehicle, the very thing I've been studying about, with my brother-in-law as a witness, to see the very technology that I've been studying about, the very technology that I've been reading about, that so many people have a hard time believing that this sort of thing exists, or that the government has a secret space program, or that we're using anti-gravitical technology, or that we've reverse engineered crafts that crashed at Roswell or these other places. And let me tell you something, it's true. At least some of it's true. And what the Lord was really confirming to me was the connection, the direct connection between that craft, that technology, and what was going on in the antediluvian world. Because the infiltration is happening again, and it's going to happen, I believe, on an even greater level, but it's going to look different than it did the first time. I think it's repackaged, it's redesigned, and the intent is deception. The intent is deception. I don't know if that answers your question, Doug.
It does, and there you have it. Folks, do you see the dots being connected between our programs? Do you see the dots being connected, the answers being given? What a fantastic explanation. Absolutely, sir. Go ahead and continue.
So I imagine that even now there's probably some certain government agencies that might actually be enraged that I divulge this information. Not that it's some kind of secretive information, but not many people that I know of. In fact, I don't know anybody who had an encounter with let's just call it a UFO for the sake of argument, that proximity. And I'm not saying that to toot my horn. I'm telling you that it was not just some random encounter. It was absolutely a confirmation from the Lord to me and to my brother-in-law that the dots that we were connecting were true. This is true. As much as people would like to deny it, there are things that are going on this earth, under this earth, above this earth, that we can't even really comprehend. The fact is we've been lied to such a degree in the modern world in which we live, through the media, through all different kinds of programs that have been, operations and mind control operations, and I would even go so far as to say the chemical lobotomy that we've been exposed to through the water we're drinking and everything, is to blind us to what's happening. And what's happening is infiltration, and infiltration is occurring again. And it has to do with authority, and it has to do with infiltrating the human race in order to set the stage for something that's about to happen. And a couple of points I'd like to make on that. One is, if you remember the prophecy, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in the book of Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm not going to go through the whole details, but Nebuchadnezzar saw that statue, and it was made of different metals, and then at the very bottom it had its feet were made of iron mixed with clay, and it had 10 toes. And then there's that very enigmatic phrase or sentence in the Bible when Daniel's describing what this is, where it says that concerning this last empire on earth, concerning this iron mixed with clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron does not cleave to clay. And what does that mean? Well, Kennedy said it. Infiltration is what it means. Infiltration instead of invasion. The stage is being set. I believe that the last empire that this planet will see before Jesus comes back, because there's always an empire. The last empire this planet is going to see is going to be a reemergence of the Golden Age, another empire of the gods, Empire of the Gods Part 2, if you will. And I believe that even now there is a incursion, an invasion, an infiltration into the human race to such a degree that many of the people who are in positions of power, and I know this sounds crazy to people, but it's just, so did these vehicles and UFO stuff before I saw it right in front of my face, that these people that are in positions of power are not fully human, many of them. And this goes back to the idea that, there's this incursion into the human race, there's this infiltration, invasion into the genome of the human race, in order to set the stage, in order to usurp power over the human race, in order to usurp authority, to set the stage for the coming of the Antichrist, who I also believe is not going to be fully human.
I totally agree with you on this, and I suppose I've heard it explained to me like the planet of the apes. We're the apes according to their mindset, these non-totally human hybrid, if you will, power elite Luciferian satanic people in power. We are the apes. They are the ones that we're to be subservient and subjugated to their will.
The chattel, as they say.
Yeah. So I you Tim, I got to tell you, you are really connecting a lot of dots here. I mean, the amount of information you covered. I have to go back to your mention of the Nazi program, for example. You hear folks, you hear people talk about Operation Paperclip, but do you hear the background that Mr. Alberino has provided? No, you don't hear the background necessarily. You don't hear the biblically based doctrine that he's referring to. So this is PhD level stuff here that we're getting into, and I just want to tell you that you're doing a fantastic job of explaining a complex subject, or at least what I think is a complex subject, and one that's difficult for people to really swallow. However, it answers a lot of questions and it connects a lot of dots.
I appreciate that. Let me drop something on you guys right now that I know we got 20 minutes left here. I want to give everybody a key. I want to keep stressing this issue of authority, this issue of human authority, and I'm flipping to a scripture here. Let me get there real quick. And this idea of infiltration instead of invasion.
And friends, we're talking with Timothy Alberino. Go to stevequill.com, the Alberino analysis. The research that this man has conducted is second to none. And of course, Mr. Alberino, for those who don't know, also put Genesis 6 Giant into Spanish, and wow, just the incredible amount of knowledge. Go ahead, sir.
So we started off way back in the pre-Adamic stuff. Now let me flip way forward to the end of the story in the book of Revelations. This is something that I think gets overlooked, often overlooked. I think it is probably one of the most amazing portions of Scripture in the entire Bible, because it makes a declaration that, again, we often overlook and we don't really understand. And this is in Revelation 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. Now, I should have prefaced this verse, this scripture, with the context, which was this is after the 1,000 years when Jesus Christ rules and reigns from the seat of David, from the city of David. This is after that happened, so don't mistake this with the second coming of Jesus. This is in the aftermath of the second coming of Jesus. This is when those 1,000 years that were promised, that were prophesied to the seed of David, that Jesus would rule and reign for 1,000 years, that his kingdom would never end. This is after he fulfills that prophecy. After the 1,000 years, we have the pinnacle of this story that's been unfolding, not only of the human story, but of the story of creation, the story of the earth, the story of all life on earth. The pinnacle of it all is very interesting, because what we have here is Jesus Christ, fully human, by the way, who's fully human, fully God, fully human. Jesus Christ has the authority, the right to govern the nations of planet Earth because he is human. He governs the nations of the planet. And what does he do after his 1,000 years is over? What he does is amazing, because it shows us exactly what the devil is plotting to do. If you want an insight into what Satan's ultimate conspiracy is, here it is, because it's the Bible upside down. Jesus, after 1,000 years, having ruled and reigned for 1,000 years, he gives the dominion, the throne, the power back over to his Father at the end of the story, at the end of the Bible, in the last couple of chapters of Revelations. Jesus gives the throne, the power. Now, he's always going to be ruling with the Father, just as now he sits at the right hand of the Father. But something incredible happens. We don't all disappear off of the earth and then go up to heaven, and that's where we are for the rest of eternity. No. The Bible says that this planet that we are occupying right now is remade, is reformed, that everything is made new, and then what happens is what I just read. God himself comes down with the New Jerusalem. God himself comes down. Behold, the dwelling of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. Just think about what that's saying. The dwelling of God is with men. For the first time ever, the dwelling of God is with men. He comes down after Jesus rules for 1,000 years. So Jesus, being fully human, has all authority to give the kingdom over to his Father. That is what the purpose of the Antichrist, one of the purposes of the Antichrist is. The Antichrist will be human enough to claim authority over the earth, and he will consolidate the power of the earth through the occult, through a bunch of other things that are going to be happening. We know this is the one world government. and everything that's about to unfold. He consolidates power under himself, and then what does he do? He gives the power to his father, Satan, who is then openly worshipped. That is like the final unveiling of the Luciferian plot. It is the final goal of the Luciferian conspiracy, is to enthrone Satan in abject worship, in visible, sitting on a throne where the nations of the earth worship him. That's what he wanted from day one. That's what he wants now. He wants to usurp the throne of Christ. You take the Bible, you turn it upside down, that's what the devil wants. That's what he's going for. And so the Antichrist is a vessel. He consolidates the nation because he has authority to do it. He has the authority. His minions have the authority. They're human enough. They gather the nations together. In fact, they make open war with God at some point. Of course, God laughs at them. And I always ask the question, what kind of weapons do you bring to a war with God? Psalm 2, it says that the nations are coming against him. They want to throw off the fetters of God. They want to throw off his bonds. They're making open war against the God in heaven. And it says his anointed, Jesus Christ. So everybody is going to know who God is and who Jesus is. They're just going to absolutely hate him, and they're going to be, it's going Luciferian. That's where this is all going. The one world religion is Luciferian. And so at the end of the day, the devil is still wanting the same thing that got him kicked out of heaven. He wants the glory and the worship that is given to God, and more specifically to the Son of God. So this is what he's been after since the beginning. This is his ultimate goal, and his plan is to usurp legally, listen to me, legally usurp authority over the planet through using infiltration instead of invasion. And obviously the Antichrist will be some kind of incarnation or some kind of a part human, part something else, possibly, as people often suggest, possibly the seed of Satan himself. Who knows? I have a very strong conviction he will not be fully human, because there's many reasons for that. But this is what the game is all about: usurpation of human authority to govern the planet and to usurp ultimately the throne of Christ. And that's where this whole thing is going.
That, folks, I just hope you got all of that. And if you're listening to this live tonight, I certainly would recommend listening to it more than once, because there's so much information here. Tim, I just can't believe, first of all, I can't believe how quickly time has flown by. That's number one. And number two, I just can't believe how much information you have conveyed in the time given. It's amazing to me. But what we're seeing today, as I understand it, as you explained it, is the implementation of the satanic agenda ahead of, in counterfeit of, the real coming of Jesus Christ.
Precisely.
And think about that, and think also, and how this applies to us today about your neighbors, your family, your friends. I'm constantly reminded of this, Tim, and perhaps we can kind of end on this somewhat of a humorous, ironic, sad subject or reference. You know, when I was young, of course, the Twilight Zone, the original Twilight Zone, was very popular, and the black and white 1962, 61, 62, 63 Twilight Zones. And of course, everyone remembers that infamous Twilight Zone, To Serve Man. And the moral there, or the topic there, was the saviors from another planet came down to Earth, and of course crops grew, and all the ills of the Earth were taken care of, and there was this planetary exchange. Well, finally, and there was a book that was left on the table, and of course the cover of the book was decoded. The book was encoded, and the cover of the book was decoded, and it was To Serve Man was the cover of the book. But ultimately, once the entire book was decoded, everyone was on board with this new age, oh, how great everything is. Someone finally figures out, well, wait a minute, this is not to serve man, but to serve man, as in soup, as in, for food. And, of course, at that time, it was too late. The deception was there. People, and I remember that closing scene where even as the knowledge that was gained of this horrific agenda, people were still climbing onto the ships. So I said all that just to say this, that what we're talking about here, I believe, is important, not just our salvation, although that's definitely important, but the mechanics of the deception will cause a lot of people to be deceived and just a casualty of the satanic Luciferian agenda. I hope I said that correctly.
No, I think you did. And I want to encourage all the listeners to look up. There's something going on right now. There's a phenomenon going on right now. It's emanating out of the New Age. It's emanating out of the occult. It's absolutely demonic, but it's called, or it's referred to as the Star Children. And I'm not referring to the Star Child, that skull that Lloyd Pye that Lloyd Pye had in his possession that he believed was alien. I'm talking about a phenomenon called Star Children, and this is one of the most amazing things to look at and then digest in the context of everything we've talked about today. Is there's a phenomenon happening where, obviously, I'm going to refer to the abduction phenomenon, of which I've studied a lot, and there's something going on to where many of these women are conceiving children, and they're having, through artificial insemination, in other words, they have an abduction experience, something is put into their womb, they carry it full term, and they're conceiving it. It used to be that these children were normally only conceived, were never conceived, that these children that were in these women's wombs was taken out before they came full term. But now it's happening that these women are actually giving birth to these children. And there's a number of very riveting testimonies and lots of information surrounding this issue that people can look into. Be careful, because it's a minefield of the New Age and of the occult. Stay away from that and just understand it for what it is. There's an infiltration happening into the human genome, into human genetics. These children are being born under mysterious circumstances, and they're finding out that their genomes are not, for lack of a better term, are not fully human. They're not like ours. They're actually genetically different. These children have different occultish medium powers. They're often in communion with different spirits, and the whole gamut of the New Age. But what's different about these kids is these aren't just individuals who buy into the New Age and who begin to practice sorcery and the dark arts. These are children who are born in a different condition than normal kids. Oftentimes, they look very bizarre. They have larger eyes. They have very bright blonde or even white hair. Some of them are incredibly intelligent. Some of them are through some form of mediumship, whether being visited by entities or whether receiving dreams, are getting these absolutely amazing mathematical equations and about physics. And we're talking about 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds are getting these equations that even a lot of physicists have come and looked at and are baffled, because they can attest to the fact that the physics and the mathematics behind the equations are sound. And these are equations that most physicists and mathematicians can't even fathom yet. And these kids are coming up with this stuff, and it's being given to them. And I'm telling people this because this is a thread. This is a thread. This will open your eyes. This will tie some of the pieces together, some of the things that we've been talking about. And something is happening right now. something is infiltrating, something is making its way into the human genome. Creatures are being born, human-like entities, non-human entities are being born that are not like us, that are not your average run-of-the-mill human beings. There's something demonic happening behind the scenes. And obviously, of course, everybody kicks around the phrase, the return of the Nephilim. And I think in some ways people are expecting giants to reappear, and I think that's going to happen, believe me. I absolutely think giants are going to show up at some point. But I think there's something more surreptitious going on in the background where there's been an agenda and there's been a program to engineer human-like creatures that look like us, that sound like us, but folks are not us. And they're on the planet now. They're infiltrating, and the purpose of their infiltration is to lead humanity into the next golden age. Humanity 2.0. We are on the cusp of the genetic revolution. We're right on the cusp. We have not yet even entered into the genetic revolution. We're right on the cusp of designer babies. We're right on the cusp of mixing and matching different genes. It'll start off with mixing and matching genes between humans. It will ultimately branch out to mixing and matching genes between humans and animals, and then ultimately will go to mixing and matching human genes with the genes of these other entities that are coming. And it's for conscious evolution. It is to evolve, to consciously evolve our species and to the next, quote-unquote, stage of our evolution, which is, of course, a lie. Really, let me tell you this, ending the program, here's what they're doing. They want to evolve us out of our humanity and then usurp the authority associated with it. And that is already beginning to happen.
So very well said.
It's already beginning to happen. So, people may doubt what I'm saying, but that's fine. Go look into this stuff for yourself. There's ample evidence out there. I mean, especially you talk about the UFO stuff. I don't even know why people question that anymore. There's just so much information and videos and data and people coming forth and giving testimony and blowing the lid on that thing that at this point in time you really have to be in a profound state of ignorance not to accept that there's something strange going on with these vehicles and these craft and all this stuff that's going on. Don't push that to the side as if it's insignificant, because this is all so very significant, because as I said last program, which I didn't get into this program, it all has to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And let me end by asking a question that I want to resonate in people's minds and hearts. And Doug and Joe, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I apologize to the listeners for having to endure my clumsy delivery of this information. But I want you to ask this. Let this resonate in your mind, this question. Please let it resonate in your mind. How human does one have to be a candidate to have eligibility for salvation in Jesus Christ? What happens if we are no longer fully human? How does that factor in to salvation through Jesus Christ, the kinsman redeemer, who came who came to the earth, became like us, and died for us?
Well, it takes the element of the ability of the Holy Spirit to dwell in us. So at that point, we are not in one with God.
And consider what I just said also, Joe, with the term the mark of the beast.
Exactly. Mr. Alvarino, thank you so much. We are absolutely out of time. I just want to say it was a fantastic program.
Yes,
God
it
bless
was.
you, my friend.
And if people can listen to me talk for a couple hours a day, Tim, you did fantastic. You weren't fumbling or mumbling or anything like that. I could give you 10 stars. It was fantastic, man.
Well, you guys are fantastic hosts, and I really appreciate you, and I'm sure everybody listening does the same.
Mr. Alvarino, the Alvarino analysis off stevequayle.com. Speaking of which, Steve Quayle tomorrow on Ebola, the bio-warfare taking place. Don't miss it. We're out of time, folks. God bless you. Thank you, Mr. Alvarino, and have a great night until tomorrow. Stay safe.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.